Being proactive in your preparedness is extremely important right now. With everything going on around the world, the worst thing you can do is nothing. We have to keep moving forward. And being proactive doesn't always mean spending extra money and getting more food and supplies, and it doesn't always mean working in the garden or working out or any of those important parts of preparedness. Sometimes it means getting uncomfortable, getting out and networking, establishing communication, and gathering intel for the things that are important to you in the sense of your preparedness so that you can be more strategic about the decisions you're making for you and your family. And that's exactly what I was able to do here just the other day, and this is what you need to be doing right now. I scheduled an appointment and was able to talk to the police chief here in my town, and we actually spent a few hours together going over all types of different preparedness items, as well as just talking about things related to the police department itself. And I got a lot of eye-opening information and extremely valuable information because of that conversation. But the best part about it was it wouldn't have happened unless I reached out, scheduled an appointment, and made it happen. And that's exactly what is hard for a lot of us to do in the community. It's hard to call your neighbor or call your local police station and say, hey, can we get together and go over some of this information? It's a strange subject for many people. But luckily, what I will tell you is that the reception was very good. Because not only are we living in a time where preparedness is becoming more mainstream and people are definitely more open to the idea of why it's important, but we're also in a situation where people want to get the community involved and they're not really sure how to unless they themselves show up and offer it. So this is what you need to be doing right now. And here's some of the information I received from my local police chief that I thought was very interesting and could help me in my preparedness, and to give you some ideas about the questions you could be asking and the information you could be getting from your local PD or even your firefighting department or even your EMS, whatever it is. These are things that I found to be important and of points of interest, just because I think that we can apply some of this information to our own preparedness. One thing I found out is that I don't have a local fallout shelter here in my town. There might have been at some point in time, but currently there is not one that's operational, and there's not anywhere necessarily in town that would be applicable to hiding from a nuclear bomb. So because of that, I understand that I'm on my own in that regard, and if I don't create some kind of underground shelter for me and my family, there's nowhere else nearby for us to go either. So these are things that now I'm aware of that I have to work on in order to be better prepared. And if I wasn't aware of that information, what would I do during that scenario? Those are things that you should already know, and if you don't, consider this something that might be important. Another thing I found out is that the local storm shelter is at the high school. Yes, I already knew that, but it was good to verify that information, and it was good to understand that there was no other shelter option either. So if the storm is coming through and I don't currently have adequate shelter for a tornado per se, I know that where I need to go is the high school, and whether or not I can get there based on the conditions is a different story, but that is my only goal in that scenario. Get to the high school or stay put. And that gives me the options I have to work with, and that's it. And I know there are no other options, which is also good intel to have. Another thing I found out is that there's no emergency response team here in town. And so some communities have like a localized emergency response team where there might be a search and rescue team, or there might be a team that responds to like a fire or a car accident to try to help out the local law enforcement or emergency services because of how short-staffed they can be, or just because of how small their departments can be. So that's something that we currently don't have here in my town, but it is something that now that the police chief and I had this conversation, I might be able to help him work on and maybe build something here in this community so that it does exist. And in case there's ever a large scale emergency, which we both agreed would be most likely a cyber attack or a grid down situation that created just a little bit of chaos within town, now we know that maybe there's plans in place to set up a distribution center and to have water and food available to the people who need it and no longer have access to those things because they didn't prepare properly. These are all things that now we can talk about and work on that wouldn't have existed otherwise, okay? The other thing I found out that I definitely had a good time with was the firearms aspect of what they carry, types of ammunition they have, and the purpose of their firearms, which I found to be very interesting. And it also gives me something to consider in the sense of what I should possibly have on hand in case my involvement with the police becomes a little bit more long-term during, let's say, a large-scale SHTF situation. Because like I said, I'm in a small town. These police officers are regular people. This isn't one of those situations where I'm trying to deal with the LAPD. So your situation might be a little different. But here what I found out is that their sidearms are 6-hour P320s chambered in 9mm, which was a little eye-opening and not expected, to be completely honest with you, but also what the military currently uses, so it makes sense and the logistics are there, and that is something that now I'm considering as bringing back as a possible option for a sidearm, just in case that's the group I end up interacting with, right? And I found out they carry Remington hollow points that are 124 grain and plus P. So that's the type of ammunition they're also running. They also have DPMS 556 AR-15s with EOTechs and Streamlights on them, and they run a Hornady TAP 75 grain load, which is a boat-tailed hollow point, and obviously optics and everything else have to be calibrated to shoot that round properly compared to your standard M193 55 grain full metal jackets. But that tells me that that's the ammunition that they're not only stocked up on, but that they're using in their firearms as their defensive choice, which gives me something to consider in the sense of maybe this is ammunition I should stock up on or zero for, just in case that interaction becomes more of a permanent situation. The other thing I found is that they have shotguns, Mossberg 500s, right? Which I clearly have as well. But all of their shotguns are specifically for less lethal ammunition. They don't use lethal ammunition in them at all. And currently that's what their purpose is because, like I said, they have sidearms and ARs already ready to go. But the other side of that story is that they're actually upgrading those shotguns to 40 millimeter launchers, because 40 millimeter launchers are apparently better for close quarters, non-lethal situations, because basically the loadings that they have can be used in close quarters without being as dangerous as some of the shotgun loadings. And then the 40 millimeter launchers also have the versatility of using things like tear gas and smoke bombs and everything else. So a lot of really good information that I would have never had access to otherwise. I mean, sure, I could have talked to one of the police officers out and about and just said, hey, what kind of gun are you carrying? And, you know, give me some info. But I would have never actually got to see some of this stuff close up. I would have never been able to understand what the types of ammunition they're using are. And a lot of times you wouldn't have even known about this 40 millimeter launcher conversion until, you know, you just see somebody with it one day. So these are all really good points of information. And this is all stuff that I can apply to my own preparedness and consider for what I carry or for what I currently stock based on what my local authority is using and stocks on as well. Now, the other things I found out, which were very important, was what's the most, you know, common threat here to the community? What is the most likely thing for the public to have to deal with in the sense of crime? And of course that was a narcotics deal gone wrong, which I think we've all seen that no matter where you live, but in the country it does happen from time to time. And it's also petty theft, which police chief said, look, this is a great town, it's safe, but at the end of the day, lock your doors and lock your car doors because people will steal stuff if they have an opportunity to do so. Generally, we don't have break-ins here, but people will open a door if it's unlocked. And that was good information to have because a lot of people in rural environments don't lock their doors. However, the police chief is saying if you don't want things to be stolen, you should probably do that. And that's good information. Now, it also tells me that there's not a bunch of gang violence and there's not a bunch of violent happenings going on all over the place regularly here in this town. So the alert status of being here compared to somewhere like where I used to be in East Bay area part of California, I don't have to worry about that crime or random crime occurring as frequently. So it gives you some things to plan for too, just in your daily life. The other thing that I found out about was their community needs. What do you guys need from us as a community, from the civilians, right? And, you know, obviously, you know, vocal support's always welcome. You know, thank you and hey, you know, let me know if there's anything you need. Always appreciated, of course, but on occasion, because of being in a small town, every so often there might only be 1 or 2 police officers on duty for the entire city. And that being said, if you see an officer being assaulted and they seem to be struggling with the situation, they more than encourage someone like myself to step in and try to help that officer. Obviously with a lot of language of, hey, this is me trying to help you, not, hey, it's another bad guy trying to jump in. But at the same time, that was encouraged more so than what I would have expected the police to actually say to me, just because of coming from places like California where you would have assumed they want you to stay away and, you know, lose any liability of having civilian involvement. But it was encouraged in the sense of, if you see an officer struggling and they need help, please help that officer. And that's something good to know, just because, you know, I was told that that's something that they would appreciate if it happened, and now I feel maybe less uncomfortable about doing so in that time. Now, the other thing I found out is that their comms, the communications they use are digital, they're encrypted, they're on the 800 megahertz frequencies, and they have statewide mutual aid channels which can actually reach all across North Dakota and basically get information for large scale events if they're going on, which obviously in a large scale SHTF event would be very important. But they don't have any way for civilians to access those communications because, yes, they were encrypted, and part of that reason was for confidentiality of sensitive materials. And then, of course, the other reason is so that they could separate themselves from civilian comms, which gives them priority over the comms and everything else related to those obvious things. Just so you're aware, their walkie-talkies are about $4,300 a piece because of needing that capability. which I can't really afford. But what I can say is that I did talk to the police chief and said, look, is there a possibility for us to maybe establish a civilian radio within the police station, so that way if someone like myself needs to reach out from the outskirts of town, maybe I have some intel on a storm moving in, or maybe I see, some malicious characters coming in from the back roads. These are things I can alert you to even if cell phone communications are down. And that was something that we both said would probably be a good idea. And maybe these are ideas that he didn't have unless we would have had this conversation. So it goes both ways, and I'm actually helping set my community up for success during an emergency now, rather than just relying on them to have it all figured out. So, and plus having personal involvement with some of these things can give you a better idea of how these things could work out during those times, right? Now, the other thing we talked about was that first aid and defensive training were things that the police would like more of. And obviously I affiliate with companies like Refuge Medical, who do medical training. I also affiliate with groups like Garrison Readiness Group, who is a group out of Garrison, North Dakota that does firearms training. And now I can talk to them about getting some of these police officers involved in some of these specialized training units, and then also trying to learn more about using things like, carbine tactics, or how to stop the bleed with, certain aspects of medical kits and blowout kits and everything else related to that. So there's a lot of good mutual relationship building that we can have here that wouldn't have otherwise been known. Now, one of the other things that I did find out is that, the police officers here, all they're trying to do is make the community a better place, and community policing is what everyone's trying to accomplish now. So at the end of the day, they want to be part of the community, at least in smaller towns like mine, and they don't want to be seen as an us versus them force. And that's not helping anybody if that's ever the case. So in these smaller towns, I'm not too worried about the idea of these police, finding themselves on the wrong side of the Constitution at any point in time. And honestly, I was more than guaranteed by the police chief here that they're very pro Second Amendment and very pro Constitution, and they would have a very hard time doing anything that went against any of those values. And that was good information to have as well, because you could possibly talk to a different police chief in a different part of the country and maybe get a completely different answer than what I got. But that's the stuff I like to hear, and that did make me feel more confident in what's going on here in the sense of policing, as well as what I could expect during a large-scale emergency. Look, there's a lot of things that we talked about. And we talked about setting up the emergency response team. We talked about the comms situation. I talked about getting a storm shelter or possibly a bomb shelter installed on my property, and the different, avenues I would have to take with the city to try to work on that and make sure everything was up to code and all those good things, right? So I got all of that information, and we even talked about building out the shooting range here on my property. We talked about the police shooting range and what they do and what they have access to, and there was a lot of really good networking there. And at the end of the day, if nothing else comes out of the conversation I had, and nothing else productive, ever comes to fruition from the ideas that we threw around, at the end of the day, the police station, the police force here, the department, at least knows who I am, and at least is aware of someone in their area who, has their back in many ways, and at the same time is not likely to be a threat if something were to ever happen. So I have that established facial recognition now between me and the chief of police, where if something was to happen in the sense of a concealed carry self-defense scenario, and I was the concealed carrier who had to defend themselves, when the police arrive, that familiarity is already going to create a situation that's less tense than me being some outsider or stranger that they've never interacted with before. And these are important steps you can be doing right now. You need to be doing this. And I literally would have had none of this information, and I wouldn't have had any of that FaceTime if I didn't just pick up the phone and say, hey, is there any way we can get together and have a quick meeting? I just have some questions for you about preparedness in the community and just some other things that are related to my own personal situation. And I was given a yes to that, and I showed up to the appointment, and we spent hours going over all this information. So, not to mention, I got a sweet tour of the police station, and I may or may not have got to look at some of their cool equipment. I'm just going to throw that out there. So, either way, these are important steps to be taking right now. It's not just about buying food. It's not just about getting out and training. It's not just about any of those things we generally talk about here in the preparedness community, although all those things are important. But some things require getting out of your house and actually meeting the people who you are going to need during an emergency if it ever comes to that situation. And worst comes to worst, those people at least know you're probably not a problem during an emergency, and that can be a huge benefit to you as well. Hopefully this conversation gave you some things to think about, and hopefully those questions that we went over are things that you can actually ask your local emergency services, whether or not you have access to those things. And I'll put a list in the description as well as in the pinned comment for those specific questions, just in case it's something you want to try to do yourself, and now you have an idea of maybe some of the things you should ask. But if you have anything else I should have asked, or any other things that would have come up during a conversation you would have had, leave it in the comments below. Let's try to keep help building each other up and building our community, and the more advice we can give each other and the better suggestions that we can get, the more likely people are to be successful in ventures like what I was just on here recently with my local PD. And these are things that we can all do, and if you're not doing them, you're not doing yourself any good. So keep those things in mind, and without anything else to say about it, that's going to be it for Magic Prep.